Today we're going to be taking a look at reasons why we might be getting a Unova game next year. We're going to start off by specifically covering all the leaks and information that has been confirmed by leakers that seems to be hinting at what's to come for next year related to Unova. And then we're going to talk about both the reasons why Unova games might happen next year and why they may not happen next year. So that's pretty much going to be what we're talking about in this video. Let's get first of all started with all the different posts about all the stuff that we do know about. And it all starts from way back last year. Now, this was a conversation that Jan actually had, and also shout out to Jan because they were the person who went through and got all this together for me, all this information, and kind of summarized it. There may be some stuff missing that we just have forgotten over the time, but basically, what's going on here for those of you who do not know what's happening? Well, this section of the video, I'm going to be talking about Riddler Khu. Riddler Khu is a legitimate leaker for the last like 4 or 5 years. I'm saying 4 or 5 years, but the last 3 years or so, he's been doing a lot of leaking of information that has been legitimate, 100% correct. He leaked Sneasler, he leaked a bunch of stuff for Legends Arceus, he leaked a bunch of stuff for BDSP, he leaked a bunch of information for every single Pokemon game in the last like 3 to 4 years, right? Since I would argue the beginning of the generation, like the most, like I guess the end of Generation 8, beginning of Generation 9. But I digress. He specifically has made a bunch of tweets, some of them hinting at what the next game might be, but also some other stuff as well. And thanks to Jan, we've been able to kind of summarize here together some of this information. So this beginning, we're going to talk about specifically this, but the rest of the video, we're going to talk about why it will happen. So let's start with this. First of all, this is all, I think, in Chinese. So I'm going to have to look at the translation here from Jan, who basically gave me a translation on Discord saying, so this tweet started from me replying to a Khu tweet. It's cropped off, but I believe it's saying that Walking Wake and Iron Leaves do not have models in game, but you can find them somewhere. Apparently they are the book as a drawing, which of course we had those confirmed. Continuing on saying, the first reply in the image, I said, no model, but we know they exist, so they only exist in the text ? Khu replied, if it was that lame, I wouldn't need to bring it up. Do you think the Gen 5 Origin Dragon is very impressive? Nobody seems to remember it. I replied, that sounds very interesting. I look forward to it. I do not want to see the Origin Dragon. I do want to see the Origin Dragon someday. Too bad Game Freak is known for digging holes, but not covering it. And this is just a saying meaning to expand your lore, but don't go into details of it. So I don't want to put hope in this. Khu said then, Pokemon games on the Switch, we got Let's Go to Scarlet and Violet now. Still loads of Gen 5 Pokemon not available on the console. It's obvious what future title will be about. Winky face, maybe the next game. The last reply from me was, that's some super exciting news. I hope the Origin Dragon is impressive enough, unlike some certain legendary Pokemon. So already here we have the first hint of him talking about Generation 5 games. Now this was the biggest and first thing that we had, and it could be some stuff that he's had in the past, but he makes a lot of tweets, okay? Just bear with me. So there is a lot of stuff that could be just misconstrued. But basically, the general gist is that he's already here hinting at the fact that, well, the games we've gotten have been from Pokemon Let's Go, which was the first game on the Switch, all the way to Scarlet and Violet, and there's still a bunch of Generation 5 Pokemon missing. They, of course, could show up in the DLC for Scarlet and Violet, or there could be a game to complete the, I guess, all the games on the Switch to finish with the last final Switch game, including a bunch of Gen 5 Pokemon. That could be the case. But then we continue on to the next thing. And that's all. As I said, it's really a lot, but he didn't, as I said, it's really a lot, but he did hint a potential Unova game last year around October within this thread, even mentioning the existence of the Origin Dragon in the game. The next post was this. Now, this post right here for Riddler Khu was the following one, where he specifically said the following thing. He said, one of them grasps the key of the lore, not Lacey, and it's a big spoiler for the next games after Sudachi. Now, Sudachi is the code name for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's DLC. However, what is he talking about here? Well, basically, one of these characters is hinting at something to do with the next Pokemon game, right? What could that be? Well, the most likely person that's being mentioned here is specifically pointed out. As for now, we actually have a pretty clear image of who the person he's talking about. He replied with this, with the same tweet with this, and then this information, and then a shh. And basically, these two Chinese characters, / kanji, is a kind of plant that a certain character is named after. You can find this on Bulbapedia, and guess what? We were given this information by Jan as well. Basically, it would be Drayden. Of course, Drayden from Pokemon, for, I guess, Generation 5, from Unova, of course, the man with the dragons. And of course, we continue here saying, to be short, he's hinting Drayden from this reply. So someone in that image is related to Drayden, which basically tells us the next game should be a Unova-related game, as Game Freak loves to use this kind of small stuff to hint the next game. But again, he's hinting it as well. So we continue over to the next thing, which is actually a tweet from Jan. So check out Jan on Twitter if you want to, guys. Definitely do. Awesome tweets, a lot of information. Dragon pattern on his pants. Do you remember any dragon type specialist with white hair and yellow eyes? Of course, in this case, we are talking about none else than Drayden. Of course, the man looks very, they look extremely similar, to be fairly honest with you guys. They look oddly similar, and it would not be that shocking to think that they are related. Possibly, directly related. So it could be that this is what's happening right here. We got a clear hint at what's going on. So then comes in the final tweet. Now, this was the tweet where he's tweeted out and said the following: "What's on your wish list? Place your bets." And then he included 4 different types of options. 3 of these were possible games, and the last one was, well, Paradox Unova, which is a bit confusing. But what is he talking about? Well, what's on your wish list? Place your bets. He says, "Let's Go Unova," which obviously would be implying a game similar to Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. Then he says Pokemon Legends Kyurem, which of course is the one that got a lot of people excited. It's the one I think I even voted for, and a lot of people seem to want a Legends game based specifically in the Unova region, right? And then there was Black 3 and White 3, and he finished it off with Paradox Unova, which is interesting. Now, here's the thing. Out of all these options here, we don't have any context behind this. He just said, "What's on your wish list? Place your bets." And given all the information we just covered, all the stuff he's kind of already told us, what do we know from this right here? Well, it could mean a lot of different things. And I'm going to break down what this could mean and all the possibilities that it could go for. Either A, he's just messing with us. None of this means anything, and this is just him pulling our tail and just messing with us. But here's the thing. This man doesn't do that often, or woman. I don't really know who Riddler Khu is, but Riddler Khu doesn't do that often, okay? Riddler Khu never really tweets something unless there is a purpose behind it. There's always a purpose behind these tweets. There's always a purpose behind whatever Riddler Khu is up to. Here's the second option, right? It's none of the game options, but it's the Paradox Unova one. That could imply that maybe we're just going to be getting a bunch of Paradox Pokemon to fill in the gap of Unova Pokemon missing in the last generations. That's one option. Of course, that's one option. However, I'm starting to doubt that. I'm starting to wonder if maybe all of these are referring to games, right? That all of them, even Paradox Unova, is referring to a specific game. Now, we assume that, Pokemon Legends Kyurem would be set in the past. But what would a Paradox Unova game be? Well, what are paradoxes in the case of the current Pokemon generation? Well, Paradox Pokemon are Pokemon that are, well, paradoxes, right? They both are and aren't. They basically are this weird new thing where we have a past and future looking version of a Pokemon, but technically they are a whole new Pokemon, right? The Walking Wake, Iron whatever, like there's Iron Valiant, whatever. There's a lot of them, okay? And all these Pokemon are Paradox Pokemon. They technically, based on some of the lore we've been able to discern from Scarlet and Violet, don't technically exist. They were more or less imagined almost into existence. They aren't straight up. I mean, at least we don't know. Based on what we know right now, we're being told that they came through a time machine, which would imply that they are from the past and the future. So these Paradox Pokemon, then could that mean that we're going to get a Paradox Unova, a literal version of Unova, a game that is either set all in the future or all in the past, or both, right? Because that's the thing with the Paradox Pokemon. They both look like they're from the past, but also like they're from the future. So could that be the case? The one here that makes the least amount of sense, I'm going to be real with you guys, is Black 3 and White 3. The chance of them doing this makes no sense. The reason I say this is because the moment you slap that number 3 on there and you say this is the third of an existing series of things, it will make it confusing for consumers. And I'm saying this just to be honest, okay? It's easy for you and me as fans. You guys are watching this video. If you're watching this, you're already way too deep into this stuff, okay? So you can't say, oh no, this and that, whatever. No. Black and White 3 make no sense. Just the logic behind them makes no sense. Obviously, because a new person getting into Pokemon or a person buying a game for someone is gonna have a hard time understanding why this game is called Black and White 3 if it isn't literally a direct, sequel to Black and White 2, which I don't think they would do. Black and White were actually the worst selling Pokemon games in general. They were some of the worst performing ones as a brand new generation. I'm not talking about like overall, because you could argue Legends Arceus sold less, but then again, it was just a singular release that released 3 months after BDSP. And also, it wasn't 2 game copies, it was one singular thing, which is way different than what you had with Black and White. But Black and White were actually, generally speaking, failures, which is kind of sad to say, but it makes me wonder, what are we looking at right here? Is it possible that Paradox Unova could be 2 Unova games, right? One more futuristic and one more set in the past. Similar to how Scarlet and Violet have Paradox Pokemon that are some in the future and some in the past. Now, I'm not saying the full games would be both set all the way in the future and all the way in the past. That would be too much work for a simple Unova game that they're doing, but something is odd here. Let's Go Unova is also one that I feel highly unlikely that they would do. They could do it. They could do both. They could do a Let's Go type game similar to BDSP, because that's what BDSP was. It was basically what Let's Go Pikachu, or I guess what Let's Go Diamond and Pearl would have looked like if they made a Let's Go game out of it. It's basically similar to that, but somehow worse. Nonetheless, though, Legends Arceus, that already happened, so Legends Kyurem could still happen. It was relatively successful, of course, not as successful as some of the other games, but you gotta keep in mind, we are talking about a singular game that released 3 months after another big release. It's kind of, whatever amount it sells is probably decent considering the competition being its own franchise. So it's competing against itself more or less, which is highly different. So out of these options, I do think that honestly Paradox Unova is the most likely one. Not just that there will be Paradox forms in the Scarlet and Violet DLC, but also maybe games that are more like a Paradox, right? 2 games that go against each other. One more set on the past, one more set more in the future. Could be the case, or a game where you literally see that rift happening. Now, why would this make sense? Well, if you think about Black and White, there is aspects of past and future within those games. Think about it. You got the White Forest and Black City. One is literally a futuristic city. The other one is set in the past. The future and past theme has been in Pokemon for so long now. They've been doing it for a long time. Scarlet and Violet is just like them going full throttle on it and just going all in, but it's existed for a long span of time. Now, we've been talking about this. It's about time we get into what are the actual chances of us getting a Unova game next year and what are the chances of us not getting it. So let's talk about that. Well, we're going to begin right here. What are the actual chances of us getting a Unova game next year? Well, I'm going to be real and say I still doubt it. Now, the reason I say I doubt it is mostly because of one aspect, which is Johto. Okay, Johto, for some reason to me, seems like the most likely next scenario. However, there is always the possibility that they could give us a Unova and Johto game next year. And you might think, hey, that seems like a little bit too much. Well, guess what? We got BDSP and Legends Arceus. And you could argue, but wait a minute, those are both set in Sinnoh. Except they're not. One is set in, well, Sinnoh, and the other one is set in Hisui, which technically is a different region. It is basically Sinnoh, but it's also considered a different region. Otherwise, they wouldn't have renamed it. They would have just called the past version of Sinnoh or past Sinnoh. No, they gave it an ancient name. So would it be too hard to imagine that we might get more than 2 things? More than one thing rather, and we might get more. I don't think so. I think it's highly logical to think that way. And you got to remember, next year is the last year of, I guess, Generation 9. And you might think, it's crazy. Wait a minute, what do you mean the last year of Generation 9? Well, it is. It's the last year for them to release another Switch game. Because after this point, they're done with the Switch. The Switch, there's going to be a new one. There's going to be a Switch 2, whatever it might be. And guess what? They got to release a final thing because we're starting the next generation in 2025. Yes, it's already been 3 years, and every Pokemon generation for the last however long amount of time has been running on a 3-year schedule. This is how their stuff works. This is how it's been going this whole time, which is why Legends Arceus was so weird, because it plopped in between stuff, and it just ended up being in this weird position where, yeah, it's a Generation 8 game technically, but it's kind of in this weird spot where it just doesn't fit in with really anything, and that's the point. They've been pumping out games like crazy to make sure that within that 3-year time span, they get out all they want to get out to match up with their promotional cycles, with whatever merch they want to do, all that kind of stuff. It's what Pokemon games really are. They're just a promotional tool for the merchandise. That's really what they actually are. They're just a way to promote the actual merch and make people buy more of that, because that's what makes the big bucks. That's what makes the big money, not the video games. It's the merchandise. The games don't do that. The merchandise does. But what am I trying to say? Well, I still think Johto is logically the next thing to go for. Why do I say this? Well, they already remade while Kanto, they remade it through the use of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. And also, those games only really existed as they needed a game to be released, a more or less test game for the Switch, but also because they wanted to make a game to make bigger connections to Pokemon Go, which of course is what they try to do with Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. However, on top of that as well, we have to keep in mind that that wasn't the only thing that happened, right? They also needed just, to give us a remake of Kanto again, because they wanted to start this new trend of remakes. And it's kind of what I would expect them to keep doing, right? Remaking things that they've already remade in the past. So where's Johto? Well, the last time we saw Johto, if you really think about it, was a long time ago. And what other game has been getting Pokemon featured in Scarlet and Violet in a very odd way and Pokemon missing? Well, it's Johto. Think about the 2 Pokemon that were just released, and also 2 Pokemon that have been being hinted by Riddler Khu to also be getting new Paradox forms. Well, it is the legendary beasts from Pokemon Gold and Silver. We're talking about Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. Suicune already got a Paradox form. We already have that. It's already in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. And guess which other generation also got a form alongside Suicune? Well, it's the other beasts that you've got from Generation 5's Unova. Specifically, we got Virizion. We got a brand new Paradox form of Virizion. Why those 2 together? Isn't it a bit strange? And remember, Pokemon, the company over there, Game Freak, they love to leave hints in these games. They love to do events to hint at things to come. They do this all the time. This is a proven fact. It has been proven. So I'm going to make the odd whim guess here, and I'm going to just personally say that I think the fact that they're hinting, well, Gold and Silver as well as Unova in these games, they're hinting at both. There's characters that are hinting at Unova. There are things, little details. For example, on the backpacks, on the characters, like if you're playing Scarlet and Violet, if you're playing Scarlet, your character actually has a little ribbon of your school that, depending on the game you're playing, will actually be gold or silver colored, which is a very specific little detail. On top of that, I already mentioned it, but you have the Iron Valiant and the Walking Wake, 2 Pokemon that are based on legendary Pokemon from both Johto and Unova. Why those 2? Why wouldn't you have made a Paradox form of something, I don't know, more popular? Articuno, Moltres, Zapdos, those guys are literally in Pokemon Go. They're super popular. Why wouldn't you have used those instead? Because there's a reason. Every choice that Game Freak makes has a reasoning behind it. They don't do this stuff on just a whim. Sometimes maybe, but oftentimes there is logic behind every choice they make. And I'm personally going to say this. I think the biggest thing hinting towards next year being Unova is the fact that Johto will be coming alongside it. What do I mean by this? I feel like what we might get next year is maybe 2 games that are supposed to interconnect with each other in a very strange way. A Paradox Unova with a almost Paradox Johto. A recreation of Johto, right, to recreate the past, but also a recreation of Unova to recreate the future of sorts, right? Maybe a Let's Go Johto type game. It doesn't even have to be a Let's Go big game per se, but just a Johto based game alongside a Unova based game. Now, I don't know exactly what choice they're going to go for, which side of the aisle this is going to end up at. I have no clue. I am just purely guessing this. But that was my arguments for why this would happen, the logic behind why it could happen. However, let's now talk about why this won't happen or couldn't happen. Well, the obvious first thing is, we already talked about it, but Johto seems to me personally still like the most logical thing next year. And there's no guarantees that they will do 2 games. There's no guarantee they'll even do a single game. Next year could be an empty year. However, given the fact that Riddler Khu is hinting and telling us more or less there is another game next year, does pretty much confirm that, yeah, we will have another Pokemon game. And also, it seems highly unlikely that they would want to end off the Pokemon era with a DLC. I mean, it just doesn't seem like something they would do for the Switch. I feel like there's gonna be another game to kind of finish things up. And also, you guys have to remember that they're developing Pokemon games at all times, like non-stop Every time, every minute that passes, there's a development on a Pokemon game happening. And not just one, but multiple projects are being worked on at the same time. We already know that companies like Ilka are working on Pokemon games as well, because they worked on Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which still sold relatively decent amounts, and that wasn't even made by Game Freak. That was the first time a Game Freak studio got to actually make a proper mainline Pokemon game, not including, Colosseum and XD Guild of Darkness, because those are kind of separate, but this was the first time where a proper mainline Pokemon game, and I guess Pokemon Remake, got to be made by somebody else besides Game Freak themselves, which is pretty massive. So you could already assume that there is development happening on all fronts for all of Pokemon. Like, on every aspect of Pokemon, there is stuff happening. But the question, of course, still remains, what is that going to be? What is that game going to be? I personally think that we're going to go back to Johto, at least for now. But I'm starting to feel more on the side of there might be a Unova game mixed in with it. And it could be a good way to get people hyped up. However, there is one big reason that I don't think Unova will happen. And it's just one simple reason. It's not time yet. Now, the reason I say this is because Pokemon tends to kind of organize up their remakes into specific time frames. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, like I mentioned earlier, every Pokemon generation lasts 3 years. And within every Pokemon generation, you are usually treated with one of two things. Let me explain. Starting all the way back from around, I would say, Generation 4 leading up to our current time. In Generation 4, we got the remakes. So it starts like this. We got Diamond and Pearl, and then we got, the year later after that, Heart Gold and Soul Silver. The first remakes of, Pokemon Gold and Silver. That happened the year after. Now, those were the first 2 years. So Diamond and Pearl first year, then Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and then in the third year, that's when you got Pokemon Platinum. To finish off the 3-year cycle before the year after Platinum, you'd just be jumping into the next thing, which was going to be Pokemon Black and White. After Black and White, you had Black and White 2. But there was no remake. Why? Because this is when the pattern started to actually show itself, where Pokemon decided, or Game Freak decided, okay, we're not doing remakes all the time. We're doing remakes every other generation, right? Every other generation, to recreate them, to bring them to whatever new console, because they don't exist on the previous, they don't exist on the current console, and the last time we saw them was many, console generations ago. And that's how this pattern has kept going, right? Generation 4 had remakes. Generation 5 had no remakes. Generation 6 had remakes. Generation 7 had no remakes. Generation 8 had remakes. And Generation 9 that we're currently in, logically, shouldn't have remakes if we're still following the pattern. Because think about it. Last year, what did we get? BDSP. Not last year, but the year before that. What was the last generation games? Well, it was Sword and Shield, which was the first year. Then you had the DLC, of course, which came right after Sword and Shield, the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra. And then after that, you got the final conclusion, the third year, with, of course, BDSP. With the only wrench being thrown into here being Legends Arceus, which was an anomaly in general. It was just an anomaly of a game, an anomaly of a situation. But that was the wrench that was thrown into this whole mix of games and stuff that we've been talking about. So beyond that, though, the pattern has consisted. So logically, this year, the first year was Scarlet and Violet. That was last year. This year is the DLC. So next year, it would either logically be nothing, or it would be something just to add on to finish things off. But what would that be? Because if we go back in time, we don't really have that many good examples. Because if we go back to Sun and Moon, well, you had Sun and Moon, then you had Pokemon Ultra Sun and Moon, and guess what, guys? Some people don't realize this, but there was a remake during Sun and Moon era, during Generation 7, and that was Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Those are actually Generation 7 games. They're part of the Generation 7 games, not Generation 8. They are part of that generation. But that's really weird, because didn't I say a second ago that there wasn't any remakes? True, there wasn't any traditional remakes. But Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee weren't a traditional remake. They were a whole new thing. They were a whole separate entity to the existing standard, which means that we shouldn't be looking at Let's Go Pikachu, we shouldn't be looking at Let's Go Unova or Legends Kyurem. We should just more or less expect the unexpected. Next year could bring something that we have no idea what it could be. It could be something that has nothing to do with Legends Arceus or the Legends franchise, or whatever you want to call it. May have nothing to do with Let's Go, may have nothing to do with Black and White, Black 3 and White 3. It may have nothing to do with any of those. It might be something totally different because they've been kind of testing new things out. Or Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee started in Generation 7 this new remake trend where basically instead of having an empty year, which is what happened back in the day. If you look back at Black and White and then Black and White 2, because they had nothing else there, they had to push out the next generation because they had nothing to cover the time frame, right? That's more or less what they had to do. But on top of that, okay, that's just the first thing, having a remake of another remake or recreating older generations allows them to more or less fill in the gaps with smaller projects. Because remaking a game is much easier than making a whole new region, generation, and everything. It's way simpler. So having that just to fill the time is perfect. It's also a good way to keep investors happy, to keep the money flowing, and also to keep the merch machine happy. Because Pokemon hasn't taken a break. There has not been a missed upload of a new... So I'm saying upload. There hasn't been a missed, release for so many years now. The last time we didn't have a Pokemon game come out in a year was 2015. Guys, that means that in 2016, we had Sun and Moon. 2017, we had Ultra Sun and Moon. 2018, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. 2019, Sword and Shield. 2020, Sword and Shield DLC. 2021, we had BDSP. 2022, we had Pokemon Legends Arceus and Scarlet and Violet. And 2023, we have Scarlet and Violet DLC. There has not been a single year without a missed game. And I do include the DLC as brand new games because they pretty much confirm that they are replacements for the third versions that used to exist. So the question still remains then, what is next year? What is the stuff that blocks the possibility of a Unova remake? The fact that when the Unova remake should happen should be in the next generation, Generation 10, which is going to start in 2025. So logically, the Unova remakes should be happening sometime in 2027, around that time frame, which also would make sense because that's when the anniversary of the games would be happening as well, and it would be around the right time to be remaking them. So it would only make sense. However, it is a bit strange how we've been getting these hints from Khu. Why is he hinting at Unova? Why is he nonstop talking about Unova? Why are there so many hints? That's where the Unova question comes up. So I'm asking you guys, what do you think? Because I personally stand in this position right now. I think we're getting Johto and Unova next, both of those. I'm not sure if they're going to both happen in the same year next year, but I think we're getting both of Johto and Unova games very, very soon. So that's going to be it for today, guys. Thank you all for watching. Peace out.